Foundation of the Rochester Public Library. Welcome to Book Sandwiched In. First, a bit of housekeeping. Thank you. First, a bit of housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones at this time. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers who so graciously share their time and talents with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and the thousands of people who attend each year. We are live streaming the formal portion of today's program to the library's YouTube channel at Rochester Public Library, New York. If you need to access the induction loop service in the auditorium, please adjust your hearing aid to the T switch. A bit of background. FFRPL, the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library, expands the Rochester Public Library's community impact through fundraising, marketing, and programming. We also manage restricted funds that provide supplemental materials support to 62 eligible libraries in Monroe, Ontario, Wayne, Livingston, Orleans, and Genesee counties. A bit of context and a reminder. Libraries are for everyone. On Friday, March 14th, the Trump administration issued an executive order calling for the elimination of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the nation's only federal agency for America's libraries. In response, the New York State Library issued a statement including this excerpt. Quote, "Threats to this institution are a threat to the state's history and the fundamental principles of democracy, which rely on an informed public and free access to information. Libraries are not merely symbols of equity, access, and opportunity. They are the driving force behind those values in every community across our state." The American Library Association responded as well. Quote, "As seedbeds of literacy and innovation, our nation's 125,000 public, school, academic, and special libraries deserve more, not less support. Libraries of all types translate 0.003% of the federal budget into programs and services used in more than 1.2 billion in-person patron visits every year, and many more virtual visits." You can visit the American Library Association's website at ala.org for frequently asked questions about the executive order, as well as links to contact your senators and representatives, urging them to overturn the executive order and protect IMLS funding. FFRPL stands in solidarity with the staff, administration, volunteers, board members, patrons, donors, and advocates who are committed to the viability of our libraries. Next Tuesday is Library Giving Day. FFRPL is fundraising to purchase supplemental startup equipment and materials for RPL Go, the new mobile library. RPL Go supports the Rochester Public Library's mission to engage the community in lifelong learning through equal access to information, technology, and expert staff. Visit ffrpl.org to learn more and donate to the project. Today, Jim Bader will review Challenger, a true story of heroism and disaster on the edge of space by Adam Higginbotham. Based on extensive archival research and original reporting, Challenger provides a definitive account of the 1986 Space Shuttle disaster. It's a tale of ambition, ingenuity, hubris, and heroism, and of the investigation that ultimately revealed how politics and power drove the failed mission. Challenger won the 2024 Kirkus Nonfiction Prize and was a New York Times Notable Book of 2024. Jim Bader is director of the Rochester Museum and Science Center's Strassenberg Planetarium, an astronomy and space enthusiast, a planetarian, and a lifelong learner. Please welcome Jim to our podium.
All right. I want to thank you for that, Susan, introduction, and just echo what was mentioned about IMLS. It also affects museums. So your Rochester Museum and Science Center is a part of that and does also get funding. So consider that it is not just your libraries, but everything that has a library attached to it and is adjacent to such institutions. So really appreciate that comment as we enter this. So thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about a subject that I'm personally passionate about. This book, when Susan reached out to me, I was immediately thrilled about the opportunity. This is a topic that I know a lot about, and I felt confident thinking I can go into this full speed, and I'll just be able to brush through the book and catch up on it, and then be able to give a comfortable review of this piece of literature. And what I wasn't expecting was the emotional impact that this book has. I'm just curious, before I go any further, how many of you all remember very vividly where you were on January 28th, 1986? That's pretty much everyone in the room. I don't. I wasn't born yet. But I do have not the same, but a similar experience with the Columbia disaster in 2003. I do know where I was. I'm from North Texas, so this is something that I didn't just see on TV. I could go outside and look up and see it above in the skies, and a lot of people from North Texas have that memory. So these disasters, unfortunately, the Challenger disaster wasn't the last one, but it was something that I felt personally passionate about. And I have to say, if I give any one single line review for the book, is that it was much more emotional than I expected. I don't think I've had a book that had me crying very out loud, I would say, in my kitchen, and you know, as I'm walking to the bathroom reading through the book. It was really impactful. If you haven't read it, I must encourage you, but maybe do it sitting down. In my case, I was reading this very, very quickly to try to get ready for this presentation, and it was a little bit unexpected. So if at any point during this you're wondering why I'm avoiding some of these much more emotional aspects of it, it's because I'm trying to get up here and talk without, and keep a straight face the whole time as we go through this. So thank you for that. Anyway, so I just want to say that this book, Challenger, A True Story of Heroism and Disaster, is a fantastic read. And Adam Higginbotham did a wonderful job of capturing the reality of things and the humanity of things. I would say that this book covered topics that, while I felt I had a great deal of knowledge on, but once really getting into it, without a doubt, this was a lot more emotional than I expected. So bear with me if we have to take pauses. A true story of heroism and disaster on the edge of space. A quick recapturing of this. I think it's important to note that it is a true story, one that is covering real people with real lives who gave everything for something that they believed in, pushing the boundaries of humanity and exploring space in ways that humans have tried to explore anything throughout history. I really, when writing that sentence, I wanted to include something to the effect of unnecessarily in regards to giving their lives. In reality, however, this accident seemed inevitable, and the author does a wonderful job of painting that picture. Some of the ways that NASA was being run at that time and the speed at which they were getting to things, it seemed like, well, maybe it wasn't necessarily going to happen to STS-51L. It was going to happen on the next one or the one after that, so on and so forth. A lot of things were, to quote the book, flying by the seat of their pants. Repeatedly, it says that in the book, and I think it's important to note. So I want to pose some questions that I had before I read the book, and that if you have the opportunity to pick up this book, you also can think about these as we go through it. First off, was this disaster truly preventable? And I genuinely believe that it was. This one in particular was absolutely preventable. But because of the nature and the environment that NASA was residing in at this time, if it wasn't STS-51L, it was going to be the next one, and so on and so forth. That's a great place for me to start, and I think that Higginbotham does just really well to point out that it isn't just a particular mistake, but the whole climate of things at NASA and in the federal government at the time was really pressuring success. So was politics the problem? It was mentioned in the quick synopsis in the brochure, and I don't want to say that politics was absolutely the problem, but politics, without a doubt, definitely played a role in the mess from the beginning. The pressures and the expectations for success were just another layer in an overall strenuous moment in NASA's history. So while maybe politics isn't the reason, politics definitely did not help in preventing this disaster, and I think that's really important to note. So finally, should this have been the last crewed disaster? When you have a disaster like this, I think immediately it's not a disaster that feels distant, like many other disasters throughout history. It feels close because it wasn't just a member of crew. It was a teacher and engineers and scientists and brothers and mothers and so on and so forth. And it brought it a lot more closer to home. It made it, I interact with a teacher on a regular basis, and so do many people. And when it affects a teacher and not just a crew member of a shuttle launch, I think it should have caught people's attention more, and it didn't. So this should have been, personal opinion, the last crewed disaster for human spaceflight. And it wasn't the case, as we know, we just mentioned, in 2003. By the way, the author does a wonderful job of setting you up for that expectation that, hey, this disaster should have been solved, but it wasn't, as we saw again in 2003. On the copy of the text that I have, I don't have this full quote, but I do think it's important to start with it. On the general quotes of people reviewing this book, one by the Wall Street Journal really stood out to me. I'm going to paraphrase it for the sake of the way it was written on the book. It says that this text is an account that reads like a script for a movie. Mr. Higginbotham has captured the terrible drama. I understand the point of this sentiment, and I even agree with it to some extent. But I do think when you compare this to something like a Hollywood movie, you're doing a little bit of a disservice. So obviously Higginbotham didn't write that. That's from the Wall Street Journal. But it's important because, as we've mentioned, and I will continue to say, these were real people. And this is what the author does the best at, is give you that view into real world lives of humans that went to space. And humanizing them repeatedly is what, for me, made this so successful. So I think overall it is a real reminder of the lost lives, and I'll say this again as I just mentioned it, of fathers and engineers and scientists and daughters and sons, sisters and teachers, people from all walks of life were on STS-51L when there was obviously a disastrous failure of one of the solid rocket boosters that led to this. But it wasn't a singular thing. It wasn't one particular problem. While the booster maybe caused it, this was absolutely a multifaceted failure. It was a failure of communication and a failure of attentiveness and a failure of too much pressure in places there shouldn't have been pressure, both figuratively and literally in this case. Anyway, did I skip something there? No, I didn't. Perfect. Okay, we can see. I think that for me, the biggest thing that this book did so well was to humanize these people. Crewed spaceflight is what we use the term today. In the past, it was probably manned spaceflight. We know that's a little bit antiquated of a term. But I think in this particular case, it's important to note that this was human spaceflight, real people, people with families, husbands and wives, people with plans. I think one really wonderful part of the book, which was obviously heartbreaking, is after the disaster immediately occurred, NASA rounded up the families as quickly as possible and took them to the crew quarters, where they keep the crew right before launch and right after landing. And the wives of one of the pilots picked up a binder that in it had the plans for what he had planned to take the family on a short vacation when they got back. And that moment, when you read through that, is heartbreaking, because everybody expected to get back and continue on with their lives. And it wasn't just that person who had plans. All of them did. I think one of the other interesting things is Ellison Onizuka, which I really should probably introduce all the astronauts. But Ellison Onizuka, if this laser pointer functions the way I think it will, perfect, over here on the far right, had invited an enormous number of people from his family in Hawaii to the launch. And when he got back, he had plans to have, I think, a pig shipped in from Hawaii, and they were going to have a huge party. They all had expectations, and these little moments of truth, Adam Higginbotham does such a wonderful job of recounting not just the politics and the specifics of what caused the disaster, but to give you that view into real people. And then finally, there were people with futures that I had no idea about this, but two of them, both Ron McNair and Krista McAuliffe, had both expressed clear interest that they had wanted to pursue a career once they got back in politics. Not only were they going to give their lives, and knowingly, by the way, that's important to note, that Adam does make a point to say that all of these astronauts knew that this and any launch could have a failure. Space is hard. But after putting their lives on the line to pursue human exploration, they also weren't going to be surprised when they get back that they're going to put their whole career into serving people and making our country better and the world better. And the author does just such a great job of really giving you that view into the humans that were lost in this, the people. So something else that I knew about, but I don't think I understood the impact, and I think that this is something in the book also does so wonderfully, which is you had building the space shuttle, and I'll mention it in a moment, but the single most complicated machine ever produced by humans. You had engineers who were on the very cutting edge of aerodynamics and space flight and science in general, and there was an immense impact on them that we don't account for. Obviously, it doesn't compare to the actual loss of life, but it's still important to note. You know, just because something is greater doesn't demean something else. So two engineers that the book covers a lot that I think is really important. Roger Beaujolais, an engineer for Morton Thiokol at the time, the lead engineer on the field joints. These are the joints where the solid rocket booster connected together. This is where the problem came out of. A year before the disaster, released a memo to the whole company and to NASA saying that these O-rings are going to fail, and if you continue launching the rockets, people are going to die. And that memo was brushed aside, by the way. It was accepted, acknowledged, and ignored, and they continued launching rockets repeatedly, not just once or twice, but over and over again. Mostly because Roger Beaujolais had mentioned that if it's freezing, it isn't absolutely inevitable. These O-rings are going to seize up and be solid, and they're not going to expand. They're not going to lock in the gases, and these rockets are going to just completely fall apart. So this was ignored. Another important person, a lead engineer also with Morton Thiokol. This one, Alan J. McDonald, mentioned in the book very often, maybe one of the main cast members of the book. Was the lead liaison for NASA, or for Morton Thiokol to NASA. The person that usually gave the all clear. You can launch. My engineers say that this is safe. On the day before the launch, all the engineers that work on the project at Morton Thiokol very clearly said we should not launch. And it was the administrators and the people in charge at Morton Thiokol, not the engineers, who said, I think we're going to launch. And this bothered Alan McDonald so much that they did something that they hadn't done before, which is they said, we need you to sign off because there was some contention in this approval, you need to sign off saying that we're clear to launch. And the way in which the author writes this saga, this portion of the events, feels really chilling, because Alan MacDonald said, no, I'm not signing anything. And for the first time ever, they requested a signed document. The person who is the lead liaison to NASA said, I'm not signing it. This rocket shouldn't launch. The company then has its administrators send a faxed-in letter that is signed, just to specially, in this one case, do the launch this time. So there were enough signs that are all listed out that it should have been stopped at so many points, whether from the lead engineers to the liaison from the company. And the author doesn't stop there, because there were unnecessary pressures from the federal government at the time, and there were also reasons to stop just for the sheer sake of the seas were really rough on that day, and they didn't want to take the boats out, which they usually do to prepare to catch the solid rocket boosters, not like with a net, but they go and collect them in the water immediately and take them back to land. And they were saying, I don't think we can get out there to get it. That normally would have constituted a scrub, but because of political pressures, we'll get into that now. I'm just choosing this photo of Ronald Reagan because it, well, in all honesty, is one of the positive things that came out of the political situation in that particular moment, was Ronald Reagan's, at least to the public, nationally televised response. But a huge problem is that, and the author does such a great job of this as well, pointing out that the success of NASA immediately spells success for the current administration, because it is an executive agency. If that executive agency does well, then the executive is doing well. And this is part of a huge problem that added all that pressure onto things. So, yeah. So the point was absolutely not left out by the author, but I do think that if I give it one criticism, it could have done a little bit better job to include more of the politics in there. But maybe, like probably all of us, we're getting lambasted by this constantly. Having to hear about politics from all directions, I just think it's unfortunately something we probably need to hear more than anything. And finally, I want to ask a question that I think the book should have done a great job of doing. And I will say I don't have an answer, but the question is, will these impacts from the federal government continue to allow future disasters? And does it have to? I don't know. I think it probably will. But is there anything that we can do about it? I don't know the answer to that question either. But I hope in asking it, and that you do take the time to read this book, maybe somebody will come up with a good solution. I wish that I had one, and maybe the answers I do have at the moment, I think I'll probably keep to myself, but they are opinions, right? And I'm here to tell you my opinion specifically on the book, maybe not political opinion at the moment. But I think it's important to note, and the author does lay some groundwork for you, but probably could use a little bit more. Now, where am I on time? Okay, I'm doing fine. This is great. So, overall, just as a full recap on things, I think that to put it in words, this was a book about learning the hard way. And this wasn't the first disaster of its kind. Apollo 1 was a terrible disaster on the launch pad in a test where you had 3 astronauts who also were raising concerns about we have a completely oxygenated capsule, and if anything sparks, we have, I think it was hundreds, maybe thousands of feet of this sticky stuff that you use, Velcro, that's what I'm looking for. That was too difficult. Velcro that was known to create just enough static electricity that it could ignite that oxygen environment inside of the capsules, and it wasn't listened to. Communication was skipped again. Learning the hard way, generally speaking, is my preferred method of learning for most things. I can prepare and study as much as prescribed or as I can read in a guide, but I have found that nothing really teaches me the way learning by failure does. The catch is, in the case of human spaceflight, this is not an acceptable path. And the author does such a wonderful job of giving you not the opinions, but the facts that let you see the clear and obvious truth and the whole nature of it, which was these are engineers and administrators, sometimes so disconnected that all that they see is the economic situation. They're trying to make money. They're trying to progress their political prowess and power. And they don't mind learning by failure. And in the case of human spaceflight, that's where it should have ended. It shouldn't be learning by failure with human spaceflight, as we found. And so overall, I would say this is a lesson in patience. It's difficult to say that, but some things need time and need patience to deal with. And when you have human lives at stake, the 3 in Apollo 1, the 7 in the Challenger, and the 7 that were on Columbia disaster as well. People should have seen these coming, and they did, which is the worst part. Spaceflight is extremely complicated. It was mentioned several times in the book that the space shuttle was considered the most complicated machine ever built by humans, and this cannot be underplayed. There were so many moving parts and sections and pieces and more that have to work together simultaneously at the same moment against nature, right? The weather, the nature of the physics of materials, human error. Just because one person doesn't do one tiny job, this could be hugely impactful for human lives. And then combined coincidences, or in the case of Challenger STS-51L, the failure to communicate. Maybe, and this seems wild, nobody told the astronauts that these were issues. No one told the astronauts. The engineers talked, the NASA administrators talked, the federal government understood, but no one told the astronauts. And just imagine if you had told them, we're worried about these seals. Would they have said, yeah, absolutely, light the candle, let's go? I don't know. So certainly stressful. So I'll finish this off with the title of heroism, but I do want to quote one thing because listed in the book, it was something that was really impactful for me, and if there's one emotional thing that I'll read, this will be it. So Adam Higginbotham does a really wonderful job of portraying everything, from the failures of the administrators to the humanization of what are just names to many. They are a crew. When you say it like a crew, it makes me think of Star Trek The Next Generation. I think of the crew members you don't know the names of, the red shirts, and that feels a little bit offensive. And the author does such a perfect job of letting you see the humanity in it all. So I will end this by reading the sonnet included in the book, written by John Gillespie Magee Jr., and it is widely used by astronauts and aviators, whether in memorials or on headstones or just as personal prayer before flights and launches. I think it's a fitting end to this review of a fantastic piece of literature. But first, I just want to mention this. So the speech that Ronald Reagan gave on January 28, 1986, after the awful disaster, it was certainly lacking in some things, but I would say overall it was a really great response to a horrible incident. Ronald Reagan was supposed to give a State of the Union that night, and that was called off. In his place, you got a nationally televised speech where he said a few but important words of the disaster that needed to be revered. And the last little bit, I'll just read quickly. And slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. This is a quick summary of both the first line and the last line of the sonnet that I'm about to read to you. And that concatenation of this sonnet, I think, was really well done, fitting into this, especially because of how important the sonnet is to many aviators. So I have it here. I'll just read it to you. It's called High Flight by John Gillespie Magee Jr. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-spit clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung, high in the sunlit silence hovering there. I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the wind-swept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. So I want to go ahead and thank you all for letting me talk to you. I went a little bit short, so this gives us time for questions if you have them, 10 minutes, whether about the astronauts and their places, how it is specifically relevant to Rochester, and our Challenger Learning Center, which many of you may know of, is not currently there at this time, but they still exist in the area. I think there's one at Lockport. You guys might be able to correct me on that. Yeah, I'd be happy to answer questions if you have them.